Hi, my name is Alain Hunkins. I'm the author of Cracking the Leadership Code and CEO of Hunkins Leadership Group. And what I do is help high-achieving people become high-achieving leaders. On this episode of Leadership and Loyalty, Dov and I will be talking about some great things. First will be how the next generation of leadership is going to be about giving away power rather than hoarding it. We'll also be talking about the need to be the facilitator in chief as opposed to being a fixer. And if you don't believe me, you should ask your spouse or your partner. They'll tell you what we're talking about. And third, we'll look at some practical tools on how you can energize your team that have nothing to do with doing. And as a bonus, you'll also learn how you should end every meeting by asking for a receipt. Want to know what that means? You'll have to tune in. So stay tuned.
Welcome back to our delicious conversation with Alain Hunkins. He is the author, the best-selling author of Cracking the Leadership Code, 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. We were talking about in the first part, the difference between a command and control sort of person who's running the whole thing and putting themselves under enormous amounts of pressure in the process, and how destructive that is to the individual, but to the organization and to the people who lead. And rather than doing that, becoming this sort of chief facilitator and what that means. We've also touched on what the 3 areas are of what it takes to building a strong leader. So now as we come back, I want to come back into the practicality of that, because it's lovely theoretically, but the practicality of, so what does it take to become a chief facilitation officer? What does it take to really connect? We talked about listening in part 1, but what does it take to really connect? What does it take to really communicate in a way that is powerful and effective? And how can we practically collaborate with those that we are facilitating? So let's welcome Alain back, and let's jump right in. So we started off with in the sense of communication, that communication actually starts by listening rather than by telling. So what's the next practical thing that we need to sort of jump into, Alain?
Yeah, so if we think about communication, and there's all sorts of great research and data that shows that hours and hours a week are wasted on people trying to figure out vague and unclear instructions. So I'd say rule number 1 when it comes to communication is humans are good at many things, but reading your mind is not one of them. So that being said, this is a kind of cardinal rule of leadership, and I coach people, and this probably comes up at least twice a week in my coaching, which is you need to make your implicit assumptions explicit. If there are things that you think people might know, don't take the chance that they might know it. Spell it out very clearly. And I'll give you even a more specific example of what this looks like. I'm sure all of our listeners right now, you've been to many a meeting where the meeting finishes and then everyone has whatever version of what we're going to do coming out of here on their own. And some of you have gone off and had those mini meetings after the meeting, like, hey, Deb, what did we decide we're going to do? Oh, that's well. And so you have 8 different versions of reality, 8 different directions we're all going off, and we wonder where we're not a high-performing team. So here's the simple hack or tool that you can use, and I call it asking for a receipt. All right, now think about what are receipts, right? In life, you get a paper receipt when you buy something because it is a proof of a completed transaction. And the more important the transaction, the greater the likelihood you want a receipt. So if you go down to the local 7-Eleven and buy a candy bar, you might say, I don't need a receipt, but you would never dream of buying a house or a car without having a receipt. So that's where the term comes from. And in fact, to bring this to life in terms of thinking about asking for a receipt, there's a great example that comes from the fast food industry. So Dov, you might remember, but in the 1980s is when all the fast food franchises started putting drive-throughs into all their fast food restaurants. And at the beginning, the drive-through process was a nightmare. It was very common that people would drive up and place their order to get their food. They drive up to the window to pick it up, and it'd be filled with mistakes. And this was across the industry, it was standard. And this went on for years. And this is a real issue. And then suddenly, the drive-through mistake rates just started to plummet. You might be wondering, well, what new technology did they invent? It was super simple. What happened was the employees started repeating the orders back to the customers before they make the food. And so if you order 2 cheeseburgers, 2 Cokes, and 2 French fries, they would say, to confirm, 2 cheeseburgers, 2 Cokes, 2 French fries? Yes, right? Show up, guess what you get? You get what you ordered.
Right.
And so just think about if a fast food place will do this for, a $2 set of French fries or a cheeseburger, don't you think that the work that you do is worth spending at the end of your meetings before you finish? Let's go around and do a check or a receipt for understanding. What is everyone's understanding or confirmation of what are the next action steps coming out of here? Now, some of us do this sometimes, but a lot of us sort of assume, hey, we're smart corporate professionals. We're highly paid executives. We know what's going on. Yeah, we know it until we don't know it. So that's a simple example of a practical tool. If that becomes a habit, again, I think so important is that what the best leaders do is they practice these fundamentals consistently. It's not just once every so often, but practicing that. So that's an example of specific things you can do around becoming a better communicator.
I love the idea of asking for a receipt. In our work, one of the things we will say is, okay, so we've agreed on this. Yes. Okay. So tell me what that means to you, right? It means I've got to go do X and Y. No, no, it's not that, right? I can think I've communicated. There's a rule in neurolinguistic programming that says you are responsible for the communication that is received, right? So it's not you're responsible for the communication you give. You're responsible for the communication that is received. And the only way to know that is by, quote, asking for a receipt, as Alain just said, right? Which is, what does that mean to you? It means, no, it doesn't mean that. Here's what it means. It means you need to do this by 5 o'clock, and this, you need to have 3 other members on to work on this, this, and this. Oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah, I know. So now, instead of me being pissed off with you and frustrated by Tuesday for you to have the thing ready on Wednesday, and now you're working till midnight to get it done, really a half-assed job. Now you have way more energy and effort because we're clear. And that receipt of communication, I just think that's a solid tool, a strategy that anybody can put in place.
Yeah.
But we don't do it with our kids. We don't do it with our partners in life. We don't do it with our partners in business. We don't do it with our team members. We just assume, and we all know the saying about making assumptions, right? So, so that's a great one. What about in the context of collaboration? Because again, I'm giving away some of my power and this belief in competition, which I don't have, fortunately. But collaboration is like, I don't know, mate. You're really I'm backing off here. I'm not going down that road. Talk to us about a strategy, some tactics about how to actually healthily collaborate without bruising the ego, because the ego is definitely going to come up with some.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. So what I found in my research, and I write about this in the book as well, is that for people to perform at their best, there's 4 basic human needs that have to be satisfied. And those needs are, there's a need for safety, both physical safety and psychological safety. Mm-hmm. There's a need for energy, so that you work in an energized environment. There's a need for ownership, that people feel that they can take ownership and have autonomy and some freedom over their work. And then there's a need for purpose, that people feel that what they're doing is contributing to something greater than themselves. So for each of those 4 things, again, safety, energy, ownership, and purpose, there are specific things that we can do as leaders to promote an environment where those needs are met. Let's take a couple of examples. Let's go to energy. How many of us, this is going to sound really obvious when I say it, but how many of us have been to a meeting that just kept going? Like literally, you're at 2 hours and you've not yet taken a break. So my first thing on energy is, I call it use the 90-minute rule, which is basically, biologically speaking, humans are not wired to be able to focus on anything for more than 90 minutes at a time. because as you all know, when it starts to feel, you get itchy, you get antsy, your brain starts to get distracted. So guess what? Take a break. And so the rationale behind this is you think you're being efficient by trying to cram it all in. Cramming stuff in works really well on paper, does not work really well in humans, right? I have yet to meet a person who said, gosh, we crammed so much in, that was so effective, right? So we have to make sure we don't confuse efficiency with effectiveness. Here's another thing to consider on the subject of energy. How many of you, and you can do this either live in person or remotely on Zoom, are scheduled with your meetings as per the meeting default template, meaning you have a 9 a.m. meeting that goes from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. You have a 10 a.m. meeting that starts at 10, goes till 11, and so on and so forth, with zero buffer time built in. Again, that works really well for your calendar application, does not work very well for humans who might actually need to either stand up, stretch, go to the bathroom, or just take a breath and rethink about what the heck are we talking about right now. So those are two specific things, and these don't happen on their own. They take leaders who need to design environments that support the human, as opposed to humans basically being ruled by the environment. You know, you put a good I think it was Peter Drucker, you might know this one. You put a good person in a bad system, and the bad system will win every time.
Yeah.
And so we need to create environments that are going to support our people. And great leaders design these environments by design, whereas lousy leaders just do it by default. They're unconscious. They go, I don't know. I did. And they mean well, but you want to make sure that you're doing something, not just meaning something.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I run a lot of big programs, not just a training, but a program that'll run for multiple days.
Yeah.
And I know if you don't get people to breathe, if you don't get people to stand up, if you don't get people to move, if you don't get them to do something, they're going to cease to be engaged. They get what I call donut eyes. Their eyes glaze over, right? They're just like, oh, yeah, right. So, you know, it's really important. And, you know, and I think you make a very valid point, which is that a lot of people never consider that there needs to be a buffer zone between meetings. If you want to integrate what happened in that meeting, where is the zone for you to take notes about it? Where is the zone for you to go talk to a fellow compadre about what you just went into this meeting? What was the insights from it? And we go from one thing to the next. And it's kind of like, because you've all done it, you've read a book and you were like, you had this crap in your head that I've got to get this book finished for whatever the reason was. And then at the end of the book, you're like, what was the book about? I don't really know, because you were focused on getting to the end as opposed to focused on getting the most out of it. And if you think about meetings as chapters, right? Why wouldn't you take a break at the end of the chapter and go, okay, what's in that for me? As you read Alain's book, you know, and you read the leadership code, there's an importance to stop and go, okay, what's the integration here? What's the application to me, to us, to our team, as opposed to, oh, let's check the box. I read Alain's book. Who cares?
Yeah.
I've read thousands of books. So what? If you're not integrating them, it doesn't mean a thing. So it's really important. I love what you're saying around that in the application of meetings, because there's a way to actually, and by the way, it's not my opinion, there's Yale research on this. If you stop and take notes on what you spoke or what went on, not just the notes during, but notes on the notes. So you take notes during, you take notes on the notes, your likelihood of retaining that information goes up by multiple hundreds of %. If you not only take the notes during and take notes on the notes, but then discuss it with somebody else multiple hundreds of times again, in the possibility of you integrating and applying it. So that pause is quote, a waste of time that is the least waste of time and probably more valuable than the freaking meeting itself.
Totally.
So I love that. Thank you for that. And thank you for reminding leaders that we have to design that. We have to say that time there, even if it's you're going to go to the water cooler or whatever it is, that's okay. Just please don't distract yourself with another doing, i.e., go check your Instagram profile.
You bring up such a good point, right? So in fact, one of the things I oftentimes teach in workshops around building energy is, all right, we're going to take a 10-minute break. Right now, what I'm going to invite you to do is on a scale of 1 to 10, where's your energy right now? 1 is low, 10 is high. And when we come back, the challenge is how can you make sure it's at least 3 points higher? What will you have to do on this break? Because oftentimes, like you just said, oh, we're taking a break. Great, let me just switch tasks. Now I'm going to check all the emails that I have not been checking because I've been in this meeting. And that's not a break. That's just doing other work. And you bring up such a good point here, Jeff, because I think, we live in this activity-centric culture where it's all about being busy. And I know, yep. What badge of honor do you get for saying, oh, I was in meetings all day long today, other than you can say, poor me. But really, what's the point? And maybe if we met a little less and reflected and did some more thinking, and also the willingness to call each other out on, if you don't have the models of people who do this well, you have to be courageous and revolutionary enough to be the ones that my meetings are going to only last for 50 minutes and give people 10 minutes to reflect and buffer. My meetings are going to ask people for a receipt at the end and start to create that diligence, because then you will role model what you seek from others. And otherwise, we don't do it. And there's sort of this unspoken thing where, if you don't call me on my mediocre leadership, I won't call you on it. Right? Because how many people really go and ask for, like you said earlier in the first part of the show, are you willing to say, I want to be better? What can I do? That takes a level of vulnerability and humility and courage to change. And those are not necessarily hallmarks of the human condition.
Right. But in this, in these 3 characteristics of this leadership code, which is connection, communication, and collaboration, I think it takes courage to collaborate.
Yeah.
So talk to us about applying courage in the context of collaboration.
Yeah. So a piece of this, a lot of this has to do with part of the courage in that, we talked about the need for ownership, that people need autonomy, which means that if you have that little, but no, it should go this way, I should do it my way. So you've got to back off. You've got to back off and let people, don't tell them how to do their work. You want to give a clear why we're doing what we're doing. You want to have a clear objective of what we want to achieve, but then you need to back off and give people the time and the space to create their own way to get there, and be okay with the fact that they're not going to do it the way you would, because they're not you. And that takes some courage. And yeah, and there are ways to mitigate. I mean, obviously, if you're concerned, there's the risk. What if they do this? I hear all those risks, but there are ways to put some guardrails in, whether those are little fence posts where you have check-in moments for people to check in, but how can you do all that in the spirit of supporting their own autonomy, as opposed to you're not tracking with my vision, right? Because no one wants to be the mold that you become the cookie cutter for. No one's like, that's not what people are looking for, especially in this day and age. So that is a way to really think about, how can I promote collaboration, is to make it less about me as the leader and more about them as the doer. And the more I can facilitate their doing, and by the way, when they're making progress, celebrate the hell out of it, right? It's like, because that is the number one thing that motivates people, is feeling like you're making progress towards a meaningful goal, as opposed to you get to the end of Q3, people hit the target, you're like, great, all right, first day of Q4, back at it again. I cannot tell you how many people I talk to, and that is the hamster wheel they are on. It's like whatever they're doing, they might even achieve and succeed, but they never get the fruit of the reward of it. It feels good. And that is just a recipe for futility and a recipe for burnout, ultimately.
Yeah. And it's a need to know that all human beings need that. And we live in a society that denies that. So it's a basic human need to feel validated, recognized, and celebrated. So, and most people won't do it themselves because they live in fear of the boss. So
Yeah.
you as the leader have to be the person who validates and celebrates that person. And you go, okay, what did you do? And they go, well, I did this. And I was like, wow, okay. What was really great about that? What was the challenge that you went through? How did you go through it? Okay, wow. What was your strategy? Fantastic. Now let me ask you a question. How have you celebrated that? Well, I haven't, boss. Okay, how are you going to? Oh, I'm supposed to? Yeah. And I want you to come back tomorrow and tell me how you celebrated your success. I bought the kids chicken wings and we we all sat around and we talked about what dad did and how he did it. Great. Okay, fantastic. You know, whatever it takes. It doesn't have to be a big ta-da, but it
Yeah.
has to be a psychological validation. And I think that so often we're, as you said, we're on the hamster wheel and we end up burned out because of it. So taking that to the next level, I talked about in part one, it's difficult for leaders. They've come up through the ranks, they've paid their dues, and there's some kind of like bullshit in their head around, well, if I had to put up with it, the people I'm leading have to put up with it. It's just all there is to it. And of course that's terrible. Um, and oftentimes it takes something dramatic to make somebody go, I'm doing it wrong. Because admitting we're wrong is not a big thing for humans. We're not good at that, generally speaking. So what was the turning point in your career, in your philosophy that made you go, you know what? I can't do the old school anymore. I got to do something new.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember it well. It was an epic failure of my own doing. So this is taking us back over 20 years. I was at the time, I was about 27, 28 years old. And I had been volunteering for a not-for-profit organization in New York City, of all irony of ironies, that was focused on leadership development, right, on community level. And so I was a super volunteer. I was getting involved. I was support facilitating different groups. I was heading experiential training weekends. And the executive director, after being in charge for 3 years, was stepping down. And I thought, all right, I've been involved. This is a volunteer organization. I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and be to be the new executive director. Now, the way this whole process worked was that they had an annual meeting by which they had an election, and anyone who was a member of the organization could come and vote for the next slate of officers. So fine, so the annual meeting is set for a few months from now. I throw my hat in the ring to be the executive director. And only one other guy decides he's going to get involved too. His name is Gary, by the way. And Gary he'd only been around like 4 or 5 months. And in my mind, I've been doing this for 3 years. Like there's no way in hell that Gary's going to win. So I'm feeling pretty full of myself. We go and I go to the evening and there's the whole election. So the votes are all cast, the ballots are all counted, and they announce the results. They say final score, 37 votes to 6. And my first thought was, yes, I crushed it. And then that split second later when I realized, no, actually Gary got the 37 votes and I got the 6. And I was just, talk about humiliation. I couldn't talk to anyone. I didn't talk to Gary for like 6 weeks after this because I was just so mortified that I'd done so poorly. And so we ended up meeting for lunch and I kind of half jokingly said, so Gary, did you know you get all those votes? He said, yeah, of course I knew. I said, what do you mean you knew? He said, yeah, well, I started talking to people. When I got here, I started asking people about who they were. I said, can we meet for coffee? And can I talk to you about why are you in this organization and what's your vision for it? So he started asking people about this stuff. And then he said, I'm thinking about running for executive director. Here's my vision. And I kind of see this idea, this whole team being a part of this. And would you be a part of the team? And would you show up on election night and vote for me? He asked them for the votes. So as he's saying this all to me, I'm having this blinding flash of the obvious going, this all is so makes sense.
Mhm.
Why didn't I do any of it? And so this, going back to your question, is what was the wake-up call? Because I think you're right. People don't shift until they have this moment of, like the wake-up call. And for me, it was, I was operating under this belief that people lived in my own head, right? That they knew how good I was. They knew. And so for me, this was one of the big moments of, and I think this is such an important lesson for all leaders to learn. There's this huge gap between what you intend and how you're being perceived, right? So my intentions were good. I thought I'd be good. And I thought my good work should speak for itself. But all of that was focused on me, 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 me. What Gary did differently is he went, you, right? He started talking to other people. Who are you? What is it? And taking an interest in them. As you probably know, the famous quote from Dale Carnegie, if you want to seem interesting, be interested. And so he took an interest in other people. And again, he modeled connection, reaching out to people, communication. What do you think? Collaboration. He started doing all those things. And then he also made the explicit ask, would you come and vote for me? Would you do this for me? Realizing that people, again, I was trying to get them to read my mind. You should do this.
Yep.
And so that for me was this wake-up call of, I have so much, I don't even know what I don't know. I have so much to learn. Now, I'm super grateful that happened when I was 27, 28 years old, because I think that definitely put me on this path. Now, have I made other mistakes along the way? Absolutely. But that was a big one that really shifted my mindset and thinking about this whole approach to leading people.
Thank you for sharing that story with us. I think it's powerful and it's poignant because the reason it's poignant is because I think that so oftentimes we're working our nuts off. We're saying, you know, well, I'm the one doing 70 hours a week and I'm the one who's doing all this and I never get rewarded. You know, we've all heard that of the yin yang, right? I did all this and they overlooked me and they went with Susie or they went with Charlie or, you know, whatever it is. And it's like, yeah, no, that's not what it's about. It's not about that. People will, you know, there's a very simple saying when I used to do sales training, and that is people will buy from friends even at a higher price. And what that means is become relational, right? Chief Relationship Officer, CRO, become a relationship officer, build relationships, and people will do whatever you want them to do, not because you're telling them, but because they want to. And that's a huge difference. So that's a great story and a great example of here's the guy who volunteered for 3 years, did all the right things, quote, paid his dues, and is looked over and massively voted over by the guy who chose to build relationships 20 years ago. Now, let me just, I really just want to pin in that because that was 20 years ago. And if you think that that was effective 20 years ago, try today, because millennials and Gen Z will not put up with this crap. And they'll just, because how often do I hear a baby boomer say, oh, millennials feel so entitled, right? That they don't want to pay their dues. No, they don't. And I don't blame them. They don't need to. There are certain dues they have to pay, of course. But they believe not in work-life balance, but in work-life blend. That is, they're in relationships at work. And if you're not a member of that relationship cycle, why would they do anything for you? Why would they do anything for you? How often do you run in to help the neighbor you've never met? The neighbor you've never said hello to, who's never said hello to you, but the neighbor on the other side who will always say hello to you, always chats about you, ask how your kids are. They need something, you'll be there in a second. It's the same thing. It's the law of reciprocity. It's very human. Alain, this has been fabulous. Thank you, sir. Before we finish, we are already at the end of part 2. Want to make sure that people know how to find you, how to find out more about you. So please let everybody know how they can tap into your resources, find the book, and contact you.
Sure thing. Yeah. So you can go to my website, which is www.alainhunkins.com. I'll spell it out for you. It's ALAIN HUNKINS.com. Lots of resources there. You can connect with me on LinkedIn as well. And since you've listened this far, you are definitely part of the End of the Podcast Club. If you have any questions, you can email me directly at Alain, ALAIN, at AlainHunkins.com.
Fabulous. Thank you, sir. And of course, we will make sure that all those links are posted in the show notes so you can find out everything and anything you want to know about Alain and how to reach out to him and how to connect with him. And we'll even post in the show notes a link to his book where you can find out about how you can take it as well. So we'll make sure you got his Twitter as well as his LinkedIn in there. And you can hang out with other conscious leaders and you can chat about this episode that you've been listening to or any past episodes inside of our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. Simply look for the Leadership and Loyalty Podcast, because it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your true capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, simply go to DOVBARON.com, dovbaron.com, because unified actualized meaning is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you can become a chief facilitation officer and how you can use the 3 pieces of that code that you need to really take your leadership way beyond what it is. Not sure what I'm talking about? Go back and listen. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.